Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. As we welcome you once again on this Wednesday evening in conversation with myself, Inayat Wadi. We welcome you, our listeners, our viewers, as you join us on the various platforms of Salam Media this evening. And our focus is going to be once again tonight on Palestine. And we're talking about the municipal elections that took place recently, as recent as Saturday. And we've seen the headlines. Palestinian officials hailing local elections in Gaza and in the West Bank, loyalists of President Abbas talking about a big win in the Palestinian municipal elections. And as these elections have been taking place, it's actually just how easy, how difficult has it been to vote when nearly 2 million people, 90% of Gaza's population, have still been displaced during this genocide that has been unfolding, and also huge question marks about the elections in Gaza in itself, because the elections were held in a specific area in Deir al-Balah, where I think 70,000 people, there are 70,000 people, and there was a poll of just 23%. And if we do the maths, we're talking of about 16,000 people that had voted out of a population of 2 million. And also when one looks at the West Bank, talking of a 53% poll, the question is just how many people have actually voted. But we're going to unpack the municipal elections and why the world should actually know that we cannot move on from the genocide that had unfolded with devastating consequences for the people of Palestine. My guest tonight, Abdulla Moaswes, Palestinian writer, researcher, and educator, and also Ahmed Asmar, journalist and PhD candidate in international relations. I see Dr. Abdulla Moaswes is up on screen, and Ahmed as well. Dr. Abdullah, and to you, Brother Ahmed, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. Welcome and jazakallah to both of you for your time with us at Salam Media.
Alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Thank you so much for having us.
Yes, Dr. Abdullah, let's talk about the elections and your thoughts on the elections. You know, while we see the world headlines, you know, talking about these elections, a huge success, and talking about democracy returning once again to the land of Palestine. What are some of your thoughts?
I mean, it's difficult to regard anything as being a democratic process in Palestine. For starters, when it excludes, the majority of the Palestinian population, whom are in exile all over the world. But this is a foundational problem of the Palestinian Authority that we can get into at another point. Another issue, of course, is that, I mean, yes, you know, these elections were successfully carried out. However, they were carried out in a context where there were a series of very bizarre, some would argue, kind of even illegal, but I would say at the very least undemocratic pieces of legislation that had been passed as well within the last few months. So, for example, candidates were not allowed to run in these elections if they didn't sign on to or endorse the PLO's political program, which obviously means, and its international obligations, which obviously means that quite a lot of Palestinian political factions would be excluded because that's not their political program. And so in a sense, you know, you can't really have democratic elections when you have to endorse one specific political program in doing so. And then, of course, there is the issue as well of the elections being held largely on promises of service delivery, but that's something that no Palestinian can guarantee when it's in the context of living under a settler colonial occupation that has control over all of your electricity, all of your water, all of your taxes, and effectively any sort of resource that you would need in order to, you know, kind of enact service delivery in an effective and sustainable way. And so, I mean, I'm very skeptical of these sort of, you know, arguments of this being truly a democratic election. I mean, we had one, you know, really democratic election in Palestine in 2006, the result of which was never respected. After that, of course, there were several municipal elections that were held with varying levels of franchise, but ultimately, you know, they're used as a tool to give Mahmoud Abbas's governing faction some level of legitimacy, despite the fact that the outcomes while not being entirely forged, are at the very least kind of defined within parameters set by the legislation that he issues, such
Well,
as
certainly, Dr. Abdullah. And also,
signing
I
up
think,
to
Ahmed,
those political program.
yes, Dr. Abdullah talks about legitimacy, and this is a question in terms of, how much credibility can one actually give to the outcome and the result of these elections when the legitimacy comes under huge questions, when one looks at the limited vote where only people registered to vote, like, for example, in Gaza City, Deir al-Bala were able to vote. I made mention of 70,000 people making up the electorate and only 23% voted. So 16,000 out of a population of 2 million in Gaza. So how much credibility can one actually give to the outcome?
Well, first, thank you very much for having me here. First of all, it is a very late step. This step was supposed to take place like 15 years ago, or even less. This step was wanted many years ago, but unfortunately, the Palestinian Authority was hectic, was reluctant in having this elections to take place, and now they have like run it in a bizarre way, where only it was just taking place in one small city in Deir al-Balah, in the middle of the Gaza Strip, where this city didn't have a lot of destructed didn't witness a lot of destruction in the Gaza Strip. As you know, is that like Gaza is still under the Israeli genocide and aggression, while this city we can say a little bit, it had some places to take place for this elections. But as I told you, that it was only a symbolic by the Palestinian Authority in Ramallah to say to the world that we are here. They want to say, I can understand it in this way, that the Palestinian Authority wanted to show, to say to the world that we are here. We have still capacity to run elections in the West Bank and in Gaza Strip. But of course, as my colleague just said, that there is a lot of deficiencies in this elections that took place. There is no like a genuine genuine elections for environment for the elections. You know, the people are under genocide. Their homes, they are all displaced in tents. So you can't speak about a genuine elections that took place. However, it can be also a positive message, that to say to the world that we are people, we are still living on our land. We can run ourselves, and we can elect our candidates.
Well, certainly. And also, I think, Dr. Abdullah, as Ahmed mentioned, that this was a largely symbolic exercise on the part of the Palestinian Authority. And you alluded to this earlier, where the only genuine elections that had taken place was in 2006. And the fact that the resistance in Palestine did not field any candidates for this municipal election, but also at the same time, it's come about at the time when the displacement of the people of Palestine still continues. Despite the ceasefire agreement, we've seen hundreds of people that have been killed since October 2025. And with the situation so volatile, how can one actually run normal elections under these conditions?
No, exactly, and that's the point I was also trying to make earlier, is that municipal elections anywhere in the world, in Palestine, in South Africa, in Europe, and you name a country, usually the purpose of municipal elections is to improve municipal services. But how can one promise to improve municipal services under the context of settler colonial occupation, and in the case of Gaza, outright genocide? That's a question that I think is incredibly difficult to answer, without just outright saying that these promises are incredibly difficult to make. That's not to say that like all of the candidates are running are like running on false premises or anything like that. People are realistic about the fact that this is the condition of the Palestinians at the moment. But what is very clear about these elections was that, yes, it was held in a really bizarre way. I mean, when we want to talk about the franchise in Gaza, right? That was the election that was held in Deir al-Balah. I mean, the electoral list, the electoral register, sorry, that exists there is, for one thing, very outdated. It is a region that suffered relatively less than other regions in Gaza, which also means that many people who are currently in Deir al-Balah are actually not from Deir al-Balah, which means that they couldn't be included in the electoral lists as per the regulations and the kind of systems and standards and policies that the Palestinian Authority use for the elections. Of course, the other factor as well is that the population register itself is outdated. I mean, throughout the genocide, we've heard of, within the very early weeks of it, tens of families, later, becoming more than that, being wiped completely off the population register. And so, I mean, it's like, for one thing, the turnout was low, but the electorate in the first place also is kind of, in a sense, difficult to quantify. So, I mean, these are all issues that relate to, how we can understand, the legitimacy of this election.
Well, certainly. And also, I think, Ahmed, what Dr. Abdullah is also talking about in terms of service delivery. Under the circumstances, under the most abnormal circumstances of an occupation, and where everything is basically controlled, and when one looks at both the West Bank and also when one looks at Gaza as well, I mean, anyone who is standing as a candidate for the election, how can he actually make commitments or promises of service delivery under these, ridiculously abnormal circumstances?
Simply nothing in their hands. Whatever they say of promises that they will do, it will be stuck, and it will be like stuck by the at the borders, where nothing is allowed to enter Gaza. As for the ceasefire agreement, like stipulated that there must enter 600 trucks daily to enter Gaza, which includes goods and any materials needed for Gaza. But in fact, what is entering Gaza is less than 100 to 150 only. So how can they make any promises? There is no infrastructure in Gaza, all the Gaza Strip, nothing at all. So there is, all the hospitals are destroyed, all the municipal services are down. Nothing is provided to the people. The people are still in a state of in one level of starvation, especially in these days where now the Israelis have restricted the entry of trucks again, because the ceasefire has been taking place since October, but during this 6-month period, many times the Israelis have decreased the number of trucks entering Gaza. But now exactly these days, there's still many restrictions imposed on the entry of goods. We are now speaking that the Israelis are not allowing to bring flour to Gaza in sufficient quantities. What about we are not speaking about the issues, the construction materials that is needed to rebuild the infrastructure facilities. So you are speaking about the basic needs that is not available until now in Gaza. So of course, all these promises that the candidates did or delivered, of course, even the people know and realize that they will not achieve any of their promises, because the situation is more difficult and complicated, and they know that they just came out of a genocide, that its repercussions is still existing, because the people until now in Gaza, they are still feeling the horrors of the genocide, because nothing has improved for their living conditions. So
Well,
that's
certainly, Ahmed. Absolutely. And also, I think, Dr. Abdullah, what is important to understand is the fact that the resistance in Gaza and in Greater Palestine as well has not contested the elections. And for the Palestinian Authority to claim legitimacy in terms of the outcome at a time when, Gaza has been overshadowed by what is taking place in with Iran and also in the Persian Gulf region as well. So clearly, this election has been overshadowed by what is playing out in Iran, but also at the same time, we still see this hope of this board of peace that Donald Trump also talks about as well. So, again, these are huge questions that one can actually raise, where you're talking about Palestinians, you're talking about elections, you're talking about democracy, and in the same breath, you're talking about a board of peace and the occupation and a further occupation of Gaza.
Yeah, I mean, so unfortunately, it's a historical fact that goes back, around 100 years, if not longer, of different international bodies refusing to accede to the democratic will of the Palestinian people. So the fate of Palestine, for at least a century, if not longer than that, has been decided in ways that don't take into account the political will of the Palestinians and what are the political desires of the Palestinian people, whether that goes back to the late days of the Ottoman state or to the British mandate, or indeed to the creation of the State of Israel, which is obviously the entity that we are now kind of facing down as being our colonial occupier. You're right. The resistance, for the most part, has approached these elections in kind of like a very standoffish way, because of the fact that the requirement to kind of sign on to the PLO's political program excludes them. Hamas are not, for example, a faction within the Palestinian Liberation Organization. They're outside of it. And so you can't ask them to sign on to a political program that belongs to another political entity. That's not a logical thing to do in any election. The other thing as well, of course, is that a lot of the presidential decrees that governed how this election took place were decreed or issued by a president who is now in the, let's count it, he was elected in 2005 for a term that was due to end in 2009, and we are now in 2026. So he is entering the 21st year of his 4-year term. And so, I mean, in a sense, the joke writes itself. And it's not just that, I mean, if we look, for example, at, different places in which candidates stood for election, in the main kind of urban population centers of the West Bank, in Ramallah and in Nablus, one list stood for election, and that was the list that largely was dominated by candidates who had some sort of affiliation with the Fatah faction within the PLO, which is of course President Mahmoud Abbas's faction. If you look at other places, for example, like in the village of Ya'bad, which has a tiny population, much smaller than Nablus or Ramallah, around 12 or 13 different lists stood for election, which is kind of like a ridiculously disproportionate number. If you look, for example, at Qalqilia, another district in the West Bank, nobody stood for election. Not a single list stood over there. And so, I mean, in a sense, like, this demonstrates kind of the hollowness of the final result, which, if you kind of look at it at face value, looks like a resounding and sweeping victory for Fatah. But if you dig even just slightly deeper, so not even much deeper, you realize that it's a very hollow victory, in the sense that it's not truly representative of the kind of political positions or the political will, or even the division of political opinions among the Palestinian population in Palestine. Forget the ones who are outside or the ones who live in the 48 territories.
Well, certainly. And also, I think, Ahmed, what complicates matters even further is if we look at Gaza, for example, and also when one looks at the West Bank in terms of the settlement expansion as well, and in Gaza as well, we've seen Israel repeatedly move the yellow line further inward. So what's happening is they've grabbed even a lot more land. And now what we've learned also is the Israeli military now has taken over more than 58% of the territory as far as Gaza is concerned as well. So, on the one hand, we talk about elections, but on the other side, the land grab and the theft of Palestinian land still continues. If you could unmute your mic, please, Ahmed.
Yes, exactly. As you said, that now currently the priorities for the Palestinian people is not to hold elections. There are many priorities, urgent priorities for the Palestinian people. Of course, in Gaza, it is different than the West Bank a little bit, let me say it. But still, the priorities in Palestine, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank, of course, are different totally than being distracted in elections. That is not it's like it's incomplete elections. It is only in municipal, where we are supposed to speak about legislative and the presidential elections at the same time. But no, the main problems for the Palestinian people are still with the occupation. And now we are not speaking about only occupation, about like the problem of the Palestinian existence is now is threatened, whether in Gaza or in the West Bank. The Palestinians are now facing the danger of expulsion, and it is not like no one can simplify this issue. No, the Palestinians in the West Bank and in Gaza are facing the dangers of being displaced from their areas and lands, and that is taking place, by the way, in the West Bank, whether in Hebron, in Misafir Yatta area, or even in many areas across the occupied West Bank. The settlements is like expanding on the expense of the Palestinians. You know, the violence of the settlers, the terrorism of the settlers that is reigning across the West Bank. We just like 1 week ago, they stormed a school, and they stole the school from a Palestinian community in Misafir Yatta in the southern West Bank. Of course, the same thing, and in a more difficult situation in the Gaza Strip, where the people are suffering from the genocide and suffering from the suffocating siege that is still taking place. So when we speak about elections and the municipal elections, it is kind like, if you can say it in a negative way, it is a kind of distraction for the public word, for the public word opinion, that we are like sitting in a normal situation and we are having elections, while in fact what we need a real like attention to what's going on and what is taking place on the ground for the Palestinian people, and how to save them from the brutality of the Israeli occupation.
Yes, Ahmed. In fact, I know the adhan was playing out in the background, and I must just say it was quite wonderful to listen to the adhan playing out in the background as you were talking as well. But Dr. Abdullah, Ahmed mentioned the word distraction. And I think this is absolutely important in terms of distracting from the real issues that are playing out. And perhaps, just in your view, if we could unpack what this distraction actually means for someone like Fatah and the Palestinian Authority, Mahmoud Abbas in particular, in terms of the long-term ambitions from a political perspective as far as Palestine is concerned. Because what we've seen is, with the ongoing internal displacement that is taking place, we see the controversial schemes to transfer Palestinians out of Gaza. We've heard about Israel, we've heard about the United States of America talking about relocating Palestinians in mass numbers, relocating them to Indonesia, to Libya, to Sudan, to Congo, Somalia. These are all the elaborate schemes that they have been thinking about as well. So again, when one looks at it in a longer term, yes, in a short term, they may have won the municipal elections or claim victory, at a municipal level. But what are the long-term issues that could be playing out?
Look, absolutely. I mean, it's very obvious that the objective of the Israeli colonial, machinery is maximum land of Palestine with minimum Palestinians, ideally zero for them, in fact. And so, I mean, yes, you're right. I mean, there has been, the Nakba, oftentimes we speak about it as being an event that happened in 1948, but there are two mistakes here. The Nakba, number one, didn't happen in 1948. It began in 1948. It still continues until today. And number two is the Nakba was not an event. The Nakba was a structure. The Nakba was a structure, a machinery, a system of erasing Palestinians from the land of Palestine, of expelling them to other places, or, in the situation we're in today, a summary genocide of a full population. So these are a few of the key dynamics that are at play. Then if we look at, the Palestinian Authority as well, the Palestinian Authority, a lot of people assume it to be a representative of the Palestinian people. The Palestinian Authority was established in 1993 as part of the Oslo Accords. which many commentators at the time referred to as being in a sense a capitulation. So, for example, if you look at the writings of the late Edward Said, one of the most important Palestinian voices, in at least in Western academia and kind of in the English language, he used the term a Palestinian Versailles to refer to what that was. It was effectively a form of surrender. It wasn't a form of liberation. And so this institution, this state, this actor, this kind of apparatus that was formed out of the surrender of one particular set of Palestinian factions in 1993, can't be seen to be acting in a method or in a fashion that is liberatory, that is really working towards freedom for Palestinians. In fact, if we go back to the 2005 elections, through which Abu Mazen, Mahmoud Abbas, came into power, one of the very first things he did was appoint a man called Salam Fayyad as his prime minister. Salam Fayyad used to be an economist with the World Bank, and he was not necessarily affiliated with any party. He was viewed as being a technocrat, and someone who had a really good ability to kind of implement a neoliberal economic agenda, which effectively was an agenda trying to kind of attract a lot of foreign investment into Palestine, to privatize a lot of key sectors, to enable kind of the growth of large-scale private capital in Palestine. And the idea behind this was, if we can convince, these big powers that really have bought into, this global program of neoliberal capitalism, the United States, the European Union, that we can, we know how to govern ourselves as Palestinians, perhaps they will offer us, like some sort of semblance of a state. But Oslo was in 1993, which was the year I was born in. So I actually don't know any time that Palestine existed without the Palestinian Authority. The kind of wholesale adoption of the neoliberal economic program aimed at kind of convincing, global North, kind of global minority powers, that Palestinians could operate, a state machinery within kind of this paradigm of neoliberal capitalism. Began in 2005, so that was 21 years ago. And so far, okay, fine. Now we have an entity that's called the State of Palestine on people's passports sometimes, or it calls itself the State of Palestine rather. But in reality, we don't have a state, nor do we really have, a truly representative Palestinian political machinery that's able to kind of claim that. And so in many ways, a lot of the policies and decisions taken by the Palestinian Authority are really distractions. So that is really a very appropriate word to use, because it distracts from the fact that you can't build a state under occupation and under colonization. You can't have service delivery when, a colonial occupier controls, as I said, your water, your electricity, your taxes, your aerospace, your borders. That's not actually something that is practicable or achievable. And so really, it's distracting from an agenda that is really more closely linked to, the actual substantive liberation of Palestine, rather than just pretending that a Palestinian state exists.
Absolutely. And also, Ahmed, I think when we're talking about, the resistance in Palestine, we know that the plan and the ultimate goal is to get rid of the resistance in Palestine altogether, which obviously will pave the way for whatever the agenda is in the long term. But also, I think what is of concern is with international attention that is now being turned away from Gaza as well, is we've seen it firsthand in South Africa as well, where people from Gaza have been obviously taken out, flown out of the Israeli air base in Ramon as well, and they've been going to destinations like Indonesia, Malaysia. They've come to South Africa as well. And as Dr. Abdullah mentioned, this is an ongoing Nakba. The Nakba didn't just, start and end. This is where it started, and it's an ongoing Nakba. And this is part and parcel of that ongoing Nakba as well. Like I said, but without the resistance, one cannot say that the resistance, without the resistance, one cannot say that Palestinians are truly represented, in government without the involvement in governance.
Well, of course, yes. Of course, there is a real danger of the displacement that is taking place, and even the resistance. Yes, of course, the people still are sticking to the resistance, to the resistance, because it is like the last resort for the people to handle the occupation. And because, as we have said, that the Oslo Agreement, which was signed in 1993, it was supposed to end up in 1999 with having a Palestinian state. But of course, the Israelis choose it just to have more time to steal more land and to make more facts on the ground. So that peaceful, let me say it, or call it the so-called peaceful path, it was fruitless, and it was just on a kind of uh, ended up with a big zero, that we never achieved anything on the ground. Contrary, it was just taking, it was like an opportunity an opportunity for Israel to grab more land and to make more facts on the ground. As for the resistance, of course, it is still in, it is taking a place, it is still in power, but of course it is weak now after the genocide that has been taking place in Gaza. Of course, the Israelis have used all its power, and they were supported by most of the Western countries just to subdue and to destroy the Palestinian resistance. Imagine, over exact 4 years, they were trying to crush the resistance, but still, until now, it is surviving, and of course, it is in a weak position. Of course, because of the siege, it hasn't an opportunity to bring anything from outside from outside Gaza, but to manufacture, for example, its tools and its uh, tools to manufacture it by materials which is available in Gaza. So what I can say, that the resistance is still present in Gaza. It is in the hearts and in the souls of the people, that they cannot relinquish this resistance, or keep, or like leave it as long as there is occupation. And of course, this is the legitimacy from where the resistance is taking its power. It is from the people, because without the support of the people, the resistance wouldn't stand like 1 month in Gaza, without the real support from the people who were protecting this resistance, and protecting the idea of the resistance, because it is the last resort for the Palestinian people. Yes, of course, now the Palestinian resistance faction have like agreed for a ceasefire terms under the creation of the so-called Board of Peace, but it is not something that it will hold, or the people will stick to, because it is like a kind of an American plot, just to try to crush the resistance along with Israel.
Well, certainly, Ahmed. And also, Dr. Abdullah, my question would be, instead of describing this as an election, would it be fair to describe this as a pilot project?
Sorry, did you say as a pilot project?
As a pilot project, yes, rather than calling it an election.
I mean, look, there have been, various exercises that have been kind of used in order to try and gain a sense of, kind of what would be the kind of popular sentiment among Palestinians in the absence of proper legislative elections and proper executive elections for the president. One of them has been municipal elections, although, I mean, I think Ahmed and myself, I hope, have done a good job of highlighting why that's a deeply flawed method of doing that, not only this time, but also in previous rounds of municipal elections. Of course, there haven't been municipal elections in Gaza in like 20 years, but at least in the West Bank, there have been. The other method that's been often used to kind of gain a grasp of the sentiment of the Palestinians who live in Palestine has been university elections, in which there are, I guess, fewer kind of like restrictions about who can run and how can an election an election campaign be carried out. But that, of course, also has its flaws, because not everybody goes to university. University students are representative of a particular social class, often of people, and so I mean, Earlier you kind of spoke of the Board of Peace as being one kind of model, and the Board of Peace does contain kind of a provision for there being a technocratic Palestinian committee, which I believe has been appointed already, with Ali Sha'ath as being its chairman. And again, like the idea of a technocratic committee completely, dispenses with, what actually is the popular political sentiment of the Palestinians. And I mean, we've, and it's not, this is not as if this is the first time that a technocratic approach has been adopted. As I already mentioned, Mahmoud Abbas, when he came into power, also, took the decision to appoint technocrats to key positions. And that's not a policy that bore any result for the Palestinians. The other thing, of course, as well as the Board of Peace and the Palestinian Technocratic Committee that's been formed, is an attempt to kind of approach this idea of trying to rebuild Gaza, but without seriously addressing the fact that it is still under occupation. Even if for example, the kind of most spectacular forms of violence were to stop, as they had stopped, for intervals between various escalations, say between 2021 and 2023, or 2014 and 2021, or 2018. The fact remains, if Israel has control over your airspace, your water, your borders, effectively, the thing that is causing the problem is not yet removed or addressed. No technocrat out there can successfully build a functioning state apparatus in those circumstances. And so, I mean, these are all kind of factors to consider if we think a pilot for what. There is definitely an attempt to kind of engineer certain outcomes and pass them off as being legitimate, and this is a very common tactic of colonial regimes. So, for example, if we look to our brothers and sisters who are struggling in Kashmir, let's say, under Indian colonial occupation, there was meant to be a plebiscite as per the standstill agreement in 1949 between India and Pakistan, that the United Nations would be able to facilitate a vote on who Kashmir would join. And, during the intervening period from 1949 up until the present, various elections have happened in Kashmir, often with a very heavy hand of the Indian state being involved in engineering outcomes. And the Indian state has often pointed to those outcomes as being, a de facto referendum, on what should the status of Kashmir be. And of course, that's, if we look at it from a pure political science perspective, that's complete rubbish. Because you can't extrapolate in that way. People vote for different things for different reasons. And so you can't assume automatically that, a vote in one direction on one issue equals a vote in a similar direction on another issue. And so definitely, I mean, these are all factors at play. Sorry, I realize I've been speaking about this for a really long time.
No, it's fine. It's fine. In fact, I'm actually quite glad that you cited Kashmir and you used the example of Kashmir, because I think, this is very, very important to understand, because exactly the same thing when we're talking about Palestine as well. Because clearly, when one talks, Ahmed, when one talks about elections, but elections without sovereignty, this is where the question mark actually comes in, because the thing is, what does it truly represent? And also, when one looks at the international community, just today, we got word about Switzerland voting overwhelmingly, saying that Palestine doesn't meet the criteria to be recognized as a state. And this was an overwhelming vote that took place in the Swiss parliament today. So if this is what the world thinks, of Palestine, that Palestine is not a state, can one imagine the people of Palestine and the skepticism on the part of Palestinians in terms of whether these elections will actually change much, for themselves, for their lives, when the world and countries like Switzerland refuse to even accept Palestine?
Yes, of course. That's the big questions that must be addressed and must be highlighted, that our problem is not like to distract the world with a kind of elections that will not change anything on the ground. No, we have to address and to keep the big questions being raised by the world, by the world public. We speak about, as you just mentioned, Switzerland and the general Western world in general, that they are responsible for the suffering of the Palestinian people. Because of course, it's known to the world that the Western world, Britain, and after that the United States, who encouraged, who created the state of Israel on the land of Palestine, and they are providing it with all means and providing it with all legitimacy to stay alive in the face of the Palestinians. Of course, when we speak about the Western injustice about Palestine, they will speak about democracy, they will speak about human rights, while just it is just to distract their public, to distract their societies, that we are doing, and we are trying to make Palestinians democratic. We want to make for them elections, and they are unable to do elections. While on the ground, no, we can do it. We can do it ourselves. But before that, we have to answer the big questions, that we need to get rid of the occupation. We need to get rid of the supremacy of the Jewish over the Palestinians, especially in the West Bank and Jerusalem. That's the question that we are seeking, like to keep them highlighted in the world media.
Well, certainly. And also, I think, Dr. Abdullah, what Palestinians are saying, that, we want solutions. We don't want slogans. There should be no sloganeering. We know, particularly even when it comes to elections as well. And we know politicians are actually very good when it comes to slogans and making all sorts of commitments and promises as well. But again, this is not the solution for the people of Palestine.
Look, I mean, you know what the last 30 odd years have shown us is that what was often touted as a solution, which was that thing called the two-state solution, which in my opinion was dead on arrival. However, now we have, confirmation upon confirmation upon confirmation upon confirmation that it is dead. That it is not practicable, it is not enactable. But within that there is an inherent problem, which is that, when we talk about Palestine as Palestinians, I'm sure Ahmed will agree with me as well. Palestine is Palestine from the Jordan River to the Mediterranean Sea. It's not a set of Bantustans in the West Bank, and it's not just the Gaza Strip, which the Gaza Strip, as a kind of political entity, or as a geographical entity rather, was created by Israeli colonialism. That was not a term that existed before. You had Gaza City, and you had these places that were within what we now call the Gaza Strip. But it being a strip in and of itself is a colonial construction. And so, this attempt at kind of like trying to project that there exists such a thing in reality as a Palestinian state is really a distraction from the fact that all the Palestinians, wherever they are in the world, whether they're in the 48 territories, whether they're in the West Bank, in East Jerusalem, in Gaza, in exile, live under the structure of Israeli settler colonialism in some form or another. The kind of efforts recently. So last year we had a whole bunch of global minority, global Northwestern, whatever you want to call them, Blancosphere states declare or at least recognize a Palestinian state. But the subtext within that actually is a recognition of the Palestinian state in its current form, in the guise of the Palestinian Authority, is actually an affirmation of the legitimacy of Israel and not the Palestinian state. Because accepting a Palestinian state within the West Bank and Gaza means accepting Israel everywhere else. And as I said, as Palestinians understand it, Palestine is from the river to the sea. And so, that in and of itself is also a distraction. From the fact that Israeli settler colonialism is enacted on all Palestinians everywhere, and accepting, kind of like a Palestinian state within this very kind of narrow idea of what it is, still doesn't actually do very much to liberate the majority of the Palestinians, those who live in the 48 territories, those who live in exile, and even those who live in Gaza and the West Bank, many of whom themselves are refugees from the 48 territories. When October 7 happened, and some people from Gaza were able to kind of break beyond, like the security blockade that was encircling them. They went into the south and they said, this is our land. And that's true. It was their land that they were expelled from in 1948 or in 1967. And so, like this whole argument of trying to work towards some semblance of a Palestinian state while Israel still exists, or while a Zionist entity, rather, even if we don't want to call it Israel, still exists, they're not compatible ideas, unfortunately. For the people who try to kind of push that.
Absolutely. And also, Ahmed, another important factor is when one looks at the economic and financial consequences as well. And even, with the PA claiming victory as well, they are still at the mercy of the Zionist entity. Because we know for over and over again, public servants and a lot of money that has been owed to public servants just by way of salaries. This Zionist entity withholding tax revenues that have been earmarked for Palestinians. So how does one actually operate normally at a normal local governance level or municipal level? When you have all these situations, particularly when it comes to finance, when tax revenues are being withheld, all of that, how does one actually deliver even services to people? Because if service delivery is the motivation behind standing for elections and promising service delivery, you don't have the money to do it. How are you going to deliver?
Well, of course, that's the engineering of the Oslo Accord, and it's related Paris Accord, which was dealing and speaking about the economic relations between Palestinian Authority and Israel, where Israel has to, according to that accord, that it has to collect their revenues on behalf of the Palestinian Authority and then to transfer them to the Palestinian Authority. But in recent years, the Israeli government has stopped transferring these monies, these funds to the Palestinian Authority, but still the Palestinian Authority is not making any action against Israel. Instead of making revolting in the face of this issue, that where is our funds in accordance to the agreement between us and you. But no, it is a kind of a humiliation, and it is a deliberate humiliation by Israel to the Palestinian Authority, and even under this humiliation, they are still accepting such a humiliation, and they are still doing and what they are doing in the West Bank. Even
Well,
almost
absolutely.
all of
Sorry,
the
continue.
service, all of the municipal service, all of them they are interrupted. There is one only functional service they are doing it, unfortunately, let me say it, which is persecuting the persecuting the resistance on behalf of Israel. And they said that clearly. And now some of those who are defending the Palestinian Authority, they are saying it brazenly that we will follow and prosecute anyone who will open fire against the Israeli settlers or Israeli army in the West Bank. So, and in fact, they are putting themselves in a position that they are just serving, they are just doing a service, even a cheap service for the Israeli occupation to keep it. If they are real nationals and they are seeking for the liberation of Palestine, they must dissolve this Palestinian Authority, which is just it is now a burden on the Palestinian cause. Not it, we thought it will be like a kind of a solution that it will end up for a Palestinian state, that this PA will turn into a Palestinian state. But now we are witnessing it. That as I told you, it was in 1999. It was supposed to be transferred into a full Palestinian state. But to have any functions of a sovereign state under occupation, it is worthless. It is just a waste of time and distracting people from the major issues which is needed to be addressed.
Dr. Abdullah, I recall during the height of the genocide where I hosted a discussion on the unity of the Palestinians for the Palestinian cause. And I think at that point in time, if my memory serves me right, I think China tried to make some sort of an attempt to unify the Palestinians. And, with the level of participation that we've seen in these elections and the PA, obviously claiming victory as well. And just in terms of how does this actually impact on the greater Palestinian cause? Ahmed spoke about the liberation of Palestine, ending the occupation. And we're talking about the whole of Palestine. We're talking about Quds. We're talking about the liberation of Aqsa. We're talking about the West Bank. And we're talking of Gaza as well. And just in terms of, what sort of impact just by the PA participating and claiming victory, what does this actually do for the unity of the Palestinian cause?
Look, I mean, in South Africa, there was once a thing called the Bantustan Authority, and it was not in their interest for liberation to be achieved because, at an individual level, at a family level, they benefited from that authority. Despite the fact that it was an authority without sovereignty, as Ahmed says, in a sense, a humiliating form of authority. And that's unfortunately what we have in Palestine today. The Palestinian Authority effectively is, the Palestinian Bantustan Authority. And kind of the higher ups within the Palestinian Authority, the people who really hold political power within Palestine, and that's not the people who win municipal elections, if we're being quite frank, are people who have various interests tied up in the position that they have. As I said, Mahmoud Abbas has now entered the 21st year of his 4-year mandate, knowing probably that he's not a popular man, among Palestinian people. And yet it benefits him to be the president of the Palestinian Authority. Even if we want to kind of go more deeply into kind of like the flows of aid and finance and whatever and investment that enter Palestine, there is some really interesting scholarly work that talks about a concept called sanctioned discourse, which means that it's the kind of line of discourse that the people providing the resource support, and therefore, if you want to receive that resource, the aid, the investment, whatever it may be, you have to fall in line with the sanctioned discourse. And the sanctioned discourse, unfortunately, if you nowadays not so much in the US because they've effectively adopted this policy of, we support Israel no matter what publicly, even though that was always the policy of the United States. The kind of sanctioned discourse for the last several decades has been, we want the Palestinians and the Israelis to talk to each other. We want them to recognize each other. We want them to talk to each other. We want to see joint Palestinian and Israeli collaborative projects and initiatives. That's kind of been what the sanctioned discourse of the global North, of the global minority rather, has been in Palestine. And so, if you want to be able to attract investment, you want to be able to attract aid grants and whatever, you fall in line with the sanctioned discourse. You work with Israelis. But unfortunately, that's not a strategy that can lead towards liberation. And so, therefore, it is very much in the interest of groups, within kind of Fatah and their kind of allied factions, to not work towards Palestinian unity, because that would affect, this very different kind of political project that they're trying to build, which is effectively a very self-serving project, and one that really only benefits those people who really well and truly fall in line with that program. Of trying to play into this like sanctioned discourse, as I said, to kind of in a sense convince more powerful states that, oh yeah, we can rule the Palestinians in the way you want them to be ruled, which is not, unfortunately, the way that Palestinians want to be ruled. Those of us who are in exile would like to return to Palestine and at least have the right to do so. And those who live in Palestine, in the West Bank or in Gaza, who are refugees themselves, would like also to have the right to return to the places where they're from in the 48 territories. And the people who live within those territories, who are originally from those territories, who were never displaced, would like the right to not live under the colonial boot of the Israeli state. And unfortunately, that's not something that falls in line with the sanctioned discourse that enables and kind of materially benefits kind of the higher ups within Fatah and their affiliated factions.
Well, certainly. And also, Ahmed, I think, before we came live on air and we were talking a bit about South Africa. And, if one looks at, and I know many Palestinians cite the South African example, and we look at apartheid in South Africa. You look at South Africa and the reason why South Africans are still so strong in fact, I would say the majority of them are actually strong in the support for the Palestinian cause is for this very reason. Nelson Mandela as well, we know of the famous statement that he had made as well. But one thing I need to assure both of you, Dr. Abdulla and Ahmed as well, that, having lived through the apartheid era, yes, you spoke about the Bantu stance and those things, the policy of apartheid, but I don't think it actually comes even remotely close to what the people of Palestine are experiencing. Because this, obviously, the genocide has woken up the world to a horror that we've never ever imagined. And that is why when one looks at even world opinion, particularly on the ground, apart from the governments and world leaders, but on the ground, we've seen a major shift, a major change. And this is a comment that I've heard over and over again in terms of how Palestine obviously will determine the new world order. And I think, having elections like this, I suppose many people have already seen the farcical nature of this election and its outcome, Brother Ahmed.
Yes, of course. Well, let me start with this. One of the disadvantages of the Palestinian Authority is that it has distracted the world attention from Palestine, because the world community has said that the Palestinians now, they have an authority, they have a state, so they don't have any problem. So that was the case over the 20 years or 30 years, the past 30 years, that the world is thinking that the Palestinians are living in a normal situation. They have an authority. They are seeing the president is coming to Palestine, visiting states outside. So that one of the disadvantages is that it distracted the world attention from the occupation. But now, with the resistance actions and with, unfortunately, the genocide that has taken place that left more than 1,000 Palestinians killed in Gaza, the world attention is returning back to the Palestinian cause, and the Palestinian cause is now is number one on the world agenda. It is because of the genocide, and it is because the resistance has returned the Palestinian path to its right direction. Why? We have been, like, for 30 years, the Palestinian Authority has been seeking for a peaceful settlement. Of course, we are not against the peaceful settlement, but at the end of that, we are stuck with an occupation that is different from the previous occupations across the world. It is like an occupation that will uproot the people. It's not only an occupation. So our main problem is to end this occupation, to fight it, and to let the world take their responsibility in fighting and deconstructing this occupation. And it starts when the people realize that there is no authority for the Palestinians unless the occupation is gone. After it will gone, we can run ourselves by any means, any political means, any way we can do it by ourselves, of course, with the help of the world community if they can come. But first, we have to address the real problems, which is the occupation, which is the mother of all problems for the Palestinians. Once it is gone, all the problems can be solved smoothly, of course.
Well, absolutely. I see we're almost out of time, Dr. Abdulla. Just some final thoughts from you before we ask Ahmed to give us his final thoughts.
No, thank you first of all for having me. It was really great to speak with you, and of course with Ahmed, my Palestinian brother. just in terms of final thoughts, I mean, it's true that what has happened in the last couple of years have not just put Palestine, at kind of the top of the world's attention, but has really demonstrated why Palestine is so central to kind of things that are happening in a broader sense in the world. If we think about like why does Israel exist, it was to help the colonial powers gain further control over this super important region that we know as West Asia, the region that we're from. And that still remains important today. Like if we're talking now about the number one topic in the news, which is the war with Iran, again, uh, that links back, this whole question of oil and the global energy supply and the global supply of fertilizers all links back to the fact that the colonizers and the imperialists, the United States and its allies want to have control over that, because that's what makes the world move. That's what makes the world move. This makes global capitalism move. And that's what kind of enables the accumulation of capital and wealth and resources by a small number of people who are exploiting the entire world. And Palestine is at the forefront of that, because we the Palestinians are the ones who have to confront the Israeli settler colonial regime head on. Those of us in Palestine and outside of Palestine both are kind of victims of this condition. And inshallah, also, we'll also be the ones who lead people towards liberation from it. And yeah, I'm grateful to have had the opportunity to kind of share these on this platform. So thank you very much, and the team at Salam Media.
Jazakallah khairan so much for that, Brother Ahmed.
Well, thank you very much for having me. It was an honor. Of course, my main message is it's like for the voice of the Palestinians, that we need like the world. We are relying on the world, like to keep speaking about Palestine, to keep supporting Palestine in all possible means. Of course, in the media field, we need like to continue the support of the Palestinians, to continue exposing the atrocities of the Israeli regime against the Palestinians. Because, by the way, it has been now like 6 months, as I said, for the ceasefire which has been taking place. But since the ceasefire took place, we are speaking about more than 800 Palestinians killed in Gaza alone, just during this period, and more than 2,000 Palestinians injured. And of course, the so-called yellow line is one day after day is moving on. So, like decreasing the space for the left for the Palestinians. So, what is needed, like to focus on, is to have on the real problems of the Palestinians and how they are suffering. While for the elections and for that, it is a kind of like just like to distract the world about what's going on, and it's not like we want the world media to take care of the real questions of and the real suffering of the people on the ground, to let the people on the ground feel let them that they are not alone. When I speak to my family in Gaza, they told me that the world has lost them, left them. They are now like looking about other topics, while no one is looking about what is taking place on the ground. The genocide is still ongoing, the starvation is still ongoing, the siege is still ongoing, and the occupation is still existing on the and affecting the lives of the Palestinians.
Well, I must say, Dr. Abdullah and Brother Ahmed as well, I think for us here at Salam Media, Alhamdulillah, we still hold very, very strong to our humanitarian journalism ethos. And right on top of our agenda is Palestine, which is something that we definitely will not stop talking about from a media perspective. But also, just recent developments in South Africa, there was a golf course where someone with a Palestinian flag was removed. We had the ruling party, the African National Congress, and other political parties protesting. They actually hoisted a Palestinian flag on the flagpole of this golf course as well. This is how serious they've taken it. Just 2 days ago, there was a big meeting with regard to the global Samud flotilla. That again, the land and the sea, obviously just to break the siege as well. So that is still ongoing. And, from a South African perspective, yes, the struggle is still there and we will continue, inshallah. But for now, we say Jazakallah to both of you. We do appreciate you taking time out with us here at Salam Media. We wish you all the best, my brothers. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
Alaikum assalam. Thank you very much.
Yes, Ahmed Asmar and brother Dr.
Thank
Abdulla
you very much.
Moaswes joining us this evening right here on Assalam Media. And once again, I must say a very, very interesting discussion, although it focused largely on the outcome of the municipal elections, but there's just a lot more that one can actually take away. And I think most important at the end of the day is for us to understand, and also, as Dr. Abdullah alluded to, that the Nakba still continues. Ahmed mentioned as well that inch by inch every day, that yellow line, and as Israel eats more into the territory of Gaza as well. And while the world is focused on what is playing out in Iran, the Strait of Hormuz, Palestine has somewhat been on a back burner, but let us just continue with our effort in whatever capacity that we have to do whatever we can and to continue highlighting the plight of the people of Palestine, and also more importantly, to work extremely hard and do whatever we can to contribute to their liberation ultimately, inshallah. And with that, I'm going to be taking leave of you once again. It's been an absolute pleasure being in the company of our listeners and viewers on Salam Media. From myself and the team, Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.